All right. Paul,
Greetings.
good to meet you, man.
Good to meet you. Appreciate it.
It was fortuitous that you've moved to Austin because now we're here.
Yes. Well, I guess we'll see in the final analysis what happens to me. But
Sure.
yeah.
Sure.
Yes.
Well, Nietzsche is certainly known for taking some extreme or radical positions. But today we're talking to a centrist. But you're a different kind of centrist than a lot of centrists.
One might say.
So you talked about radical centrism or enlightened centrism as opposed to regular centrism. Before we get started, could you just tell the audience sort of what your theory is on the difference between the two?
Yes. Radical centrism or radical enlightened centrism or just enlightened centrism, any of those memes. It's the idea that the correct position on any issue is arrived at by synthesizing right-wing considerations and left-wing considerations, which is not a very controversial idea in theory. I mean, it's akin to Aristotelian ethics, golden mean, and it's not a set of policy prescriptions. It's not saying, well, the Republicans believe this, the Democrats believe this, the centrists will believe this. I mean, it could be something like that, but it's an orientation. It's the idea that there are valid right-wing considerations and there's valid left-wing considerations. So, you take any issue like immigration. It's like, okay, well, just to orient ourselves, what's the most extreme right-wing version on immigration? Like white ethno-state, let's close the borders, we'll have just a very tight, homogenous group, to the point where there's no adaptation, there's no new ideas. That's constraining. Okay, that's too far right. What's too far left? Well, maybe open borders, just saying, oh, there's no such thing as a nation-state. People can just move through free flow of people, free flow of goods, like Yanis Varoufakis says. And, okay, so what is the radical centrist perspective? Well, it's clearly identifying the extreme right and the extreme left, and then calibrating and saying, okay, the correct answer is a synthesis of both. You need to have borders. You need to have a nation state, but you also need to have some immigration to kind of rejuvenate, the civilization and all that. And so, that would be just, you could say that's centrist. Mm-hmm. The radical aspect that I believe in is, and this would separate sort of the radical centrist from the moderate, is I'm in favor of kind of sweeping reform, revolutionary reform, in terms of stepping over procedure, stepping over rule of law in many cases. I mean, the example that people like Curtis Yarvin and sort of the post-liberal J.D. Vance type right-wingers, they have a lot of bad ideas. Don't get me wrong. Curtis Yarvin's patchwork state, I think it is, where it's this hyper-libertarian idea where the ideal future is everyone just moves to whatever place they want to be at, as if we're all disconnected.
You have no voice, but you can exit whenever you want.
Correct, yeah. Which I think is just nonsense and goes against human nature. But their analysis of people like FDR or Abraham Lincoln, those are the people that they cite as the kind of sort of authoritarian executives who are willing to overrule rule of law to get whatever reforms need to be passed. That's who they cite. And so it's not explicitly like right-wing or authoritarian, because FDR,
sure,
whatever he was
not right-wing.
Actually
two of the same, like I remember the old version of the American Communist Party had a giant bust of Abraham Lincoln at one of the rallies. And, FDR, obviously. But those examples, it's just funny because those, Michael Parenti, the Stalinist, like Marxist-Leninist, has used those examples as well as positive examples of a strong executive, which is very interesting because it's like you have a Marxist and a neo-reactionary basically agreeing.
Yeah, right.
This is the model.
Well, and that's the radical. I'll caveat all of us by saying radical centrist, enlightened centrist, they're both memes in terms of like they're semi-ironic, tongue-in-cheek. As a good rule of thumb, anyone who refers to themselves as enlightened, you can be sure is not actually enlightened. But enlightened centrist is kind of a slur that people throw around to say.
Right. Take it back.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So yes, I'm taking the term back. And so, the radical component is certainly at odds with the moderates who are, well, let's maintain the status quo. Let's just keep the lights on. And there is validity to that. Like we take a lot of things for granted in terms of...
Is there even kind of centrism between the extremes and the center involved?
This is kind of
all things in moderation, even moderation.
Right. Yeah. This is kind of it's where do you draw the lines exactly? And I suppose I take the pre-Daily Wire Jordan Peterson framework, which is an important distinction between pre-Daily Wire Jordan Peterson. and post Daily Wire Jordan Peterson.
It's like Wittgenstein 1 and Wittgenstein 2, or Heidegger 1 and Heidegger 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the framework of order and chaos is his kind of metaphysical framework. Everything fits into this framework of, the duality between order and chaos. And the right wing bend is towards order. The left wing bend is towards chaos. Now it's not, there's a positive and negative aspect on either side. So the right wing bend towards order, positive stability, sure. But then the extreme version is totalitarianism. Everyone get in line. Everyone sacrifice their identity for, the one, in the case of like Hitler or Mussolini, like the one, the one leader. And left wing societies can take on that element too. But the excess of chaos, well, you have all of like the potential of, okay, we have a free thinking progressive society. We're in the chaos of experimentation and all that. That's the positive end. The negative end is, well, complete moral relativism. There's no moral laws to guide us. There's no objective truth. It's all pure relativism. And those are sort of the twin dangers that in the broadest sense, if issues can fit into that framework, like the immigration issue.
Sure.
Right? Keep total order. No one else in. We're just staying amongst ourselves. It's homogenous. Open borders. Total chaos. Let ideas flow and all that. And any issue. Abortion. The right wing perspective is not like the moment if someone takes an abortion pill, well, that's the equivalent of first degree murder. Like we're sticking to it. We have I would consider an autistic kind of hyper rules focused view of things. And the left wing hyper perspective is, well, no, there's, we should be able to question whether after birth a baby might, be worth living. So that's the broad.
Yeah. Well, what I appreciate about that is that it seems like by looking at the extremes, you're really looking at first principles in a way.
Yeah, definitely.
And
yes.
I remember, I think it was J.J. McCullough was criticizing you for that because he was saying, well, those are fringe ideas. Nobody actually believes them. Like, how many people actually believe in open borders? How many people actually believe in a total, like, ethno-state? And so is this actually a realistic form of centrism? What would you say to that criticism?
That is a fair criticism on the face of it. First off, I would say people are radically underestimating the degree to which extremism is on the rise if they don't think there's a significant number of people who are advocating for, like, we need race-based quotas on immigration and to close things down, or that there are intelligent people advocating for open borders. Yanis Varoufakis, who I mentioned earlier, very intelligent guy. I think he was a finance minister of Greece. He's pretty popular. He has very intelligent conceptions of his idea as techno-feudalism. It's sort of a left-wing critique of modern capitalism that I think is absolutely accurate. He's a very smart person who believes in open borders. So there's certainly people that believe this. And, it's the 3% rule. It's like only 3% of a population ever needs to be on board with a particular ideology for it to eventually be, have just a giant preference cascade that then takes over society. That happened in Nazi Germany, where only 3% were actual Nazis. Soviet Union, 3% were actual Bolsheviks, and like the revolution in the United States. It was I think it's somewhat almost increasingly common knowledge that there were not. It was a very small minority of people who were committed revolutionaries in the United States. So yes, I am looking at things in the broadest context, sort of the first principles kind of way, because I think that's.
But just to keep playing McCullough's advocate here, because you did just say that both of those, the way you framed that just now sort of suggests that it's almost the extremes are a danger that we need to avoid. It would seem like somebody could easily come to that conclusion.
True.
So then why wouldn't you adopt the unenlightened, non-radical centrist view of excluding those views as well as you possibly could?
Because the radicals, this is a fundamental tenet that I think everyone needs to drill into their heads. The radicals are sometimes correct. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, the best way to deal with radicals is to rob them of their only good talking points. Okay, so for example, you have someone like Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is a radical, certainly in many ways, but the fact that he puts forward very legitimate criticism of Israel, that you could just, not all of it, but a good chunk of it that is shared by people who are perfectly mainstream, that is giving him credibility that he wouldn't otherwise have if his only ideas were the more absurd.
I've seen leftists share Nick Fuentes clips recently.
Dude.
And I wonder to what degree they know who he is or what his other views are, because there's often this like contamination politics on the left that you shouldn't even work with people who have certain views, even if you agree with them on some things. And then yet I'm seeing that bleed of Nick Fuentes into left-wing spaces, which is very odd.
Yeah.
But it kind of speaks to what you're saying, that it's like legitimizing him.
Right. If the worst thing that can happen is there's a real problem, and the loudest voices, whether or not they're offering solutions, but at least acknowledging and talking about the problem, are people who then smuggle in other bad ideas with it. And so the point about, well, the radicals, they are a danger, because if you go too far right or too far left, you end up in the kind of totalitarian or just revolutionary chaos. And so the meme of radical centrism is, it's radical in its practice, but it's not right-wing dogmatism, one moral truth to rule them all, and my particular interpretation of that moral truth is correct. And it's not left-wing relativism, which is, there's many different ways to go at things. There is a balance. And so, you can frame it as the conservatives' highest value is stability. You need a society that's stable, because look what we have. The left wing, the progressive highest value is adaptation and transformation. We do have a good functioning society, but the landscape is always changing. There's new technology, there's new social movements. We need to be able to adapt our institutions to be able to, adapt to that. And the centrists, the radical centrists' highest value is balance. How at any point can we make sure that the system we're in is optimally stable and adaptive so that it can handle new changes.
Right. Kind of like the Jedi code there.
Yeah, although the Jedi one is interesting because, have you played Knights of the Old Republic?
Long time ago.
Okay. There's actually there's a video essay, I believe, on Kreia. And I think it was like Kreia is the ultimate Nietzschean or something like that.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So Kreia is like a gray Jedi. So there's the Jedi. Real quick, and this is a quick tangent.
Sure,
that's okay. Knights of the Republic is a much more sophisticated and much better, in my opinion, piece of Star Wars lore, where in the movies it's the Jedi are good, the Sith are evil. It's just good and evil, which is much more archetypal. But in the Knights of the Republic, it's a lot more gray, where the Jedi are, they subscribe to order, but their arrogance and self-righteousness kind of undermines them, right? And then the Sith are obviously, bad, and they slaves to the passions and all that, but they don't like suppress love and like basic human instincts, right? So it's a more complicated kind of dichotomy, and Kreia sort of mediates in between,
right? And beyond good and evil.
Yeah, yes, to the degree that I understand beyond good and evil. But I believe there's a video essay I think it's like Kreia is the ultimate Nietzschean. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fun tangent because it is actually, when you think about the whole idea of bringing balance to the Force as understood by the Jedi, it actually doesn't make sense because they're all entirely pro light side.
Right.
So that's actually not balance.
Well, the argument is the Sith are like a cancer on it. And so bringing the body back into balance is limiting the cancer.
Okay. Right.
Which in the movies would make sense. But when you put it in the more, I think, sophisticated grounding of like Knights of the Republic, it's like, well, Jedi just suppress all of their, emotions and humanity. Right. So how is that balance, right?
Yeah, I think that, but there, a couple things. So on the one hand, I would say the main problem I think centrists have is that what most people associate with centrism in America today is like Washington centrism. Is basically a moderation between acceptable views within the Overton window and sort of triangulating between those views, which everyone hates because,
including me, yes,
right, because it seems to no matter which side you're on, it seems to produce stagnation and just endless corruption too. But when they poll Americans, usually the issue that a lot of people have with Congress is that they never seem to do anything. Very rarely is it that they've actually successfully done something that they don't like. It's that it seems like nothing gets done. And a lot of people see that as sort of a product of this sort of like uniparty Washington centrism. In what way do you think that enlightened or radical centrism can actually challenge that? Because a lot of people on the fringes, I guess I've given you like sort of the centrist critique of enlightened centrism, but then there's sort of the fringe critique that you're not actually going to be able to effectively challenge that status quo without a coalition of your own. or without some sort of what would you say, political interest group or something like that that represents the enlightened centrists or something like that. And where does that come in? Where does that come from, practically speaking?
So I think, the arch enemy of the radical enlightened centrist is the kleptocratic moderate, right? The people who are in the pockets of the special interest groups. Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell might as well be the same person. And so, in my mind, it's unifying the populist left and populist right on the issues that make sense. So, and caveating, underneath all of this is obviously my perspective on things. It's nice to be the arbiter of radical enlightened centrism. If more people start adopting the label, I'm gonna have to abandon it, because then it'll get tainted and I won't have control over it.
Or you'll have like sectarian centrist warfare.
That might be fun. Yeah, actually.
Like, you're not a true centrist. A circular firing squad.
There's a P.F. Jungian radical centrist and then a J.J. McCullian and whatever. That would be funny. But, like the issue of anti-war, like I think it is a majoritarian populist issue that, we do not need to be, the United States does not need to be involved in supporting foreign countries' wars that have nothing to do with us, in the final analysis. The left certainly agrees on that, and the populist right certainly agrees on that. So the radical centrist is almost like a class that you can pick in a video game. It's the diplomat class that unites the radical right and radical left, right? But the only way to unite the radical right and radical left is to bring them together on the issues that are valid. Again, the radicals tend to be the loudest voices on real issues. But then you have to disabuse them of the nonsense. And the problem with the populist right and the populist left is that they don't agree on
but
a lot of issues.
They do collaborate occasionally. I mean, like you mentioned anti-war. I've seen anti-war protests where there's 100%. Radical right-wingers and radical left-wingers. I guess I'm personally skeptical of that as a political power, because it seems like they're able to come together momentarily on certain issues, and then it doesn't last. It just sort of breaks apart.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that what the entities that actually drive politics, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good way to put it. Like what politics, as I see it, is really about is competing interest groups. Like people who have legitimately, maybe not always material and concrete interests, but, for example, if a politician is trying to appeal to a constituency that is largely farmers, they are working in an industry where they have a series of business interests, and where, certain regulations being put in would concretely affect their lives. And so they're going to be like unified around, we have to stop this regulation that's going to end up, I don't know, just as an example, like we're going to have to sell off all our farmland, it'll all go to Monsanto or whatever. I'm skeptical of the radical centrist project, even though in a lot of ways I agree with you. Maybe I'm just a cynic or a pessimist. It's just that I don't know that people's ideologies, like coming up with these ideological blocks, will actually affect the actual workings of politics, seizing the levers of power.
Sure.
And the mechanisms by which laws are made and enforced. I know that's kind of a hard question, because I'm saying solve all of the problems of modern politics.
Yeah, right. Well, let me just give you the answer that will solve it all. No, it's a completely valid point. There's two key things I would say to that. The first is, it's not, if we assume that the moderate kleptocratic center, which is what Eric Weinstein calls them, and I like that term, the kleptocratic center. Mm-hmm. If we assume that because of their failings, there are problems that are cropping up in society, right? So one of the big ones is lack of home ownership, right? For especially people under 30, under 40, we don't own anything. It's all renting, and people don't feel invested in their own communities in part because of that. Okay, so that's a real problem. That affects right and left. Well, to the degree that continues to be the case, there is more and more ammunition for the populist sort of response to that. And your point is, it's special interest groups, not broad ideological kind of coalitions or something like that. that is certainly the case now. I believe that's changed. I mean, Trump sort of, I think, kicked off the first, well, we'll see, but the first chapter potentially of, the populist movement. Bernie Sanders is another one. There's the, Zohran Mamdani in New York, or Marjorie Taylor Greene, or all these people. It's like, broadly, my thesis is that in the age of social media, in the age of rapid transformation of memes, rapid replication of memes and all that, the capacity for cultural change is never higher than it has been before. And so the idea that you could get a populist movement that is big enough and broad enough, maybe even on specific issues, like let's say capping credit card interest rate, which I support, and the libertarians will get upset by that, but nobody cares what the libertarians think. So I guess it's sort of a fact of the matter question is the culture we're in sufficiently different from the past where you can have broad-based coalitions, and
things never change until they do.
Right. And the key mechanism, I would say, is it's this concept of mimetic feudalism, where you have different ideological factions. You might have the Dave Smith libertarians. You might have the Jimmy Dore progressives. You might have the Tucker Carlson type conservatives. And you can view these people as individuals, as like mimetic feudal lords, and then all of their following, right? In the age of social media, it's much more conducive to individuals sort of teaming up and then bringing their whole coalitions with them. So like a Tucker Carlson, a Dave Smith, a Jimmy Dore, and then some other left-wing populist. Like I know Dave Smith talks to Aaron Mattei and in that crowd, or Anna Kasparian or something like that, or Cenk Uygur. It's like we're in an age now where, because people are much more attached to personalities, or they follow personalities more than like news networks or think tanks or something like that, individuals. If individuals, just a few individuals, can form a coalition, which is much easier to form a coalition amongst 10 different individuals than 10,000.
Sure.
Once those individuals form a coalition, then you have an increased likelihood where, they can kind of channel all of their, followers or mimetic feudal vassals into a single populist movement. And I believe that, again, that it's a hypothesis, and we'll see how it moves going forward. But like, I think that's how you will see more and more individuals, high-profile individuals, throwing their weight behind people, and in ways that are more consequential than just like Cardi B endorses Joe Biden. Sure. That's not what I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about thought leaders who can sort of kick off preference cascades. Like nobody cares what Cardi B thinks, right, about who endorses president. But Tucker Carlson, there are a lot of people that listen to him and then those people have followers and stuff and so on, right?
I think this touches on a couple things. Because, well, for one, I guess I should ask you before I go off on this. So this seems like it's touching on your vibes-based politics to some extent.
Yes. My most recent video I released was called "Why Being Logically Consistent is Gay and Irrelevant." So it's fair to contextualize it as vibes-based analysis. Yeah. Right.
Because this whole idea of mimetic feudalism, the idea of the meme. I mean, you would say the meme moves through society based more than anything on vibes?
Yes, definitely. I mean, my general belief when I talk about vibes-based analysis or logic versus vibes is you sort of have two competing worldviews. The worldview that most people, especially who would probably watch your channel, watch my channel, operate sort of in the realm of ideas, they would generally subscribe to the belief facts don't care about your feelings, right? That's sort of the meme, right? Which is true. If you're trying to figure out, well, what's the best policy on anything for a small organization or the government, feelings, well, it feels like we should do this. It's like, that's not going to cut it. That's bad. So people who reject logic outright and reject facts outright, of course, that's bad. But what I would say the most important fact that people need to realize when it comes to convincing other people, when it comes to having memes spread, is that feelings don't care about facts, right? And
fully agree. Yeah.
Right. And so in some sense, what I'm saying is not controversial. The way I frame it is certainly calling logically consistency gay and irrelevant might be. But the point is, if you're trying to convince people, if you're trying to win a meme war, you do need to have logically consistent arguments. You do need to you do need to be able to develop the right theories and the right memes that are worth sharing. Mm-hmm. But the way that people adopt memes is not by going, let me evaluate the logical consistency of this argument. It's literally, this person I respect believes this, I'm going to believe this too. Right. I trust, insert whoever your, person you respect, an influencer or whatever. Tucker Carlson says this, okay, I'm going to agree with this. AOC says this, I'm going to agree with this. Joe Rogan says this, Jordan Peterson says this. It's a filtering mechanism, and I would say that this is sort of what evolutionary psychology directly points to, which is people imitate the beliefs of people who they admire, sure. People who are higher on the status hierarchy, so to speak. And so, yeah, when it comes to winning a meme war, when it comes to spreading memes, it's more important to get high quality individuals that other people admire on your side, rather than have the most logically consistent idea and then just attempt to explain it to people. Right.
Which that can be, rhetorically, that can be really powerful. If you're able to convince other people or like win a debate, it can motivate people in a certain way, but it's not necessarily because they were persuaded logically. It's because of how impressive the rhetoric is.
Often. Yeah. Well, even people who are very logically oriented are, all reasoning is motivated reasoning. We're embodied creatures with, particular.
That's what Nietzsche would say. You already have a set of values.
Right.
Basically. Right. The values are more fundamental. And you're evaluating arguments according to whether they match the values that you hold.
Yes. Now you can develop the skill set of, damn, this conflicts with my values, and I'm noticing a confliction, a confliction here, and I want to actually investigate it. That's a powerful tool. And I guess just to even be more specific or practical about it, there is a subset of the population, I don't know, 5-10% of people maybe, who the primary way that they form their opinions is by listening and considering logical arguments. Like, that is a real thing. And even beyond that, a lot of people will admire someone else just because they're capable of making logical logical arguments, right? Sure. Kind of the aesthetics of intelligence or intellectualism or whatever, right?
Right. The Destiny fans, Ben Shapiro.
Yeah,
fans,
right. Jordan Peterson, and all Destiny, Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, they all make valid points, no doubt. But there's definitely an aspect of listening to someone who is smart kind of just do their thing. It's entertaining, it's interesting, and for good reason. So if we're talking about, in a democracy, winning the meme war, creating a coalition, I kind of think of it like, you ever play Skyrim or Oblivion?
Yeah.
Elder Scrolls? Yeah. Okay. Logical argumentation is like the skill of blacksmithing. It allows you to forge very powerful weapons, very powerful theories, very powerful ideas. But using the weapon, using the sword, is like blade or blunt or whatever.
Different skill set.
Correct. And so, one is logic. How do we get the right theory? The other is vibes and intuition. How do we go about using that theory? How do we integrate that theory into our lives to show that it actually has value, right? And that people will go, okay, this person is, living out what they believe. They're not a hypocrite, stuff like that. So in some sense, being a moral person who other people admire, and of course, there's many different caveats about what people admire, because people admire immoral people, certainly.
Right.
But that's the best way to get people to imitate your beliefs.
Yeah. Well, so I'm glad we elaborated on that and the vibes. Vibes as the transmission of memes or something like that. Because I think, it brings out something that, again, makes me kind of skeptical of the theory of the case for change. Or if not skeptical of it, not skeptical that it could happen, maybe just critical of that entire mode of political engagement, because I've seen how memes are exactly as powerful as you say they are. And yet, you know, how do I put this? There's nothing more obnoxious than seeing somebody respond to a good argument with a bad meme that nevertheless is very compelling. Yeah. And that's the trope we all know about of interesting argument. Unfortunately, I've portrayed you as the soy Wojak. So what do you have to say to that? And it's, you know, that the fact that we're looking at this model of this is what the populace is motivated by. And basically, like, they already have, you know, you can say values are at the root of all of it, but, you know, when you're talking about there's somebody that they admire, there's an influencer, there's an intellectual, there's a political figure that they look up to and is able to influence their thought. It's probably because that person in some ways reflects the values that they believe in or hold, and mostly probably on a vibes or aesthetical level, right? You know, the way that, again, Joe Rogan's the easiest example of, like, the way he sort of the vibe around Joe Rogan. You know, you look at the people that Rogan primarily appeals to. It's like older, middle-aged men or young, basically men.
Yeah, every man, the average guy who, you know, who asks like dumb questions, but, you know, can follow a conversation.
But I would say, like, especially that, like, 30s to 50s age group.
Yeah, or Destiny with the hyper intellectual people, or Nick Fuentes with the people in their basement, or whatever.
Right. I guess the issue that I'm seeing is that you're harnessing forces. You're basically acknowledging that the populace is fundamentally irrational and can be manipulated with and you're basically harnessing this force for political change that could very well, if you could wage a successful meme war that infects them with a lot of really horrible ideas.
100%. Yes.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, maybe you're not saying I'm advocating for this. This is just the way it is. This is the way that politics needs to operate, because that's the reality.
Yeah. There's sort of two pillars to my whatever project on YouTube, or intellectual project, or life project, whatever. One is articulating the rules of the meme war, which is just descriptive, which is just, how do ideas spread? How do some ideas beat other ideas? What are the qualities of memes that make them spread, or more, you know, more likely for people to imitate? That's entirely descriptive. You could do that dispassionately and not have any, or you could do that more from like a independent of what I believe. These are how the mechanism of how memes spread. The second one is the trying to win the meme war on behalf of, you know, what I call radical enlightened centrism, which in and of itself is just a meme for those ideas that I deem good, you know, and there's a connection to that. But, like, so yeah, pointing out, hey, this is how most people form their opinions. I'm reading a book right now called The Myth of the Rational Voter, and it just outlines this in detail of all the ways that, you know, people do not vote and think rationally. That's just a fact. And a criticism that people make is, well, Paul, shouldn't we try and teach people to be more Socratic? When you make a video calling logically consistent gay and irrelevant, doesn't that contribute to this sort of anti-intellectual atmosphere? And I would say no, because, and I guess this is a assumption, a hypothesis. I guess I can't prove this, but I believe it to be true. It does not matter how much you try to teach people Socratic dialogue. This is like Socratic and logical thinking. This is still how they form their opinions. I know many people in my life who, no matter what logical argument you make, they're not going to change their mind until someone they like or someone they respect changes. You know, religious people can be kind of the archetypal example here. It's like, you can logically present any evidence you want.
I don't think anyone's ever converted to Christianity because of the logic of the transcendental argument for God.
The presuppositionalists, they're so funny. They're like, I'm going to debate you into like the most deep spiritual phenomenological thing.
When I used to be like sort of a militant atheist, you know, new atheist kind of kid, I was debating people on the transcendental argument when I was like 17. It's a very old argument. And I have seen people who are not prepared for it get humiliated by it or just completely flounder.
Sure. Yeah.
I have never seen it persuade anyone.
Correct. Right. Which is just evidence that, more evidence, people are not convinced by the logical consistency of your argument. Because I would in fact say, like, in one narrow conception, the presuppositionalists, the transcendentalists technically they have the most logically coherent argument if you just break it down in its most again, autistic kind of hyper focus on the rules and mechanisms here. But yeah, people aren't convinced like that. So is it cynical to say that this is how the meme war operates? Maybe. I don't really care if it's cynical. This is true.
Well, I get
you just have to be fight for good then in that case.
Right. Yeah, realize the situation, and then if you want your ideas that you think are good to succeed, you have to use that. I guess maybe to bring in like a Nietzschean perspective, though, the fundamental irrationality of the populace, the masses, die Herde, the herd, is why Nietzsche was distrustful of democracy to begin with. And I mean, so what would be your reaction to that? Like, you're sort of talking about synthesizing the populist left and the populist right, but why should we favor populist politics at all if the nature of that politics is essentially manipulating
irrational
people with memes? And really, I mean, why don't we just cut out the democratic element and just have, however we determine it, okay, all these learned, influential individuals, we'll just put them on a council and they can argue it out themselves. Right.
Yeah, I would say there's a couple different things. Let's see. Why not cut out me personally, I'm not against the idea of, like, I like the idea of a mandatory civil service, and you can only vote once you've put some skin in the game and actually have sacrificed some of your individual liberty for the sake of the collective.
That's not even like Australia has that. A lot of countries have that.
Right. And they have
mandatory voting.
Yeah, which is funny because on the one hand, someone made the mandatory voting case to me, and I actually could kind of see either argument. We should either restrict voting to people who go through mandatory service or something like that. What is it? I've never seen it, but people always reference it. The Starship Troopers Citizen Guarantees Service. It's like the the Roman Empire model. Not that the citizens were voting for emperor. But then the mandatory voting argument, that's a whole other interesting thing. But I get more to the direct point. So people are irrational, but irrational doesn't necessarily mean bad. This is the rational case.
Or maybe the rational case for irrationality.
Yeah. And maybe I'll lead with this. This might fall flat, but like in some sense, like when people talk about gaslighting, like this person gaslit me or whatever, gaslighting is when someone uses hyper logic to sort of suppress and decontextualize someone else's emotions or something, like someone else's vibes, right? Like, well, why are you getting mad? I did this, I did that, it's like, and so you could make a case that, well, the people forming their opinions off of people they admire is actually a decent computational mechanism for what is true. The argument, the Brett Weinstein argument would be, this is what religions are. Mm-hmm. Religions are compendiums of evolutionary wisdom that have obviously bad ideas in them, of course, that need to be, fleshed out and contextualized in the modern environment. But by and large, the sense-making mechanisms that we've used since sense started being a thing in terms of, whatever our chimpanzee-like ancestors were, prior to language. We had to orient ourselves. We still had to exist in a social context. Evolution selected for certain ways of knowing and epistemic transmission, like, memes. And the point about you adopting the beliefs of someone who you admire, someone who is higher status, is an evolutionary is a epistemic mechanism that was selected for by evolution and had enough time, and because of that had enough time for evolutionary selection pressures to act on them to weed out the bad ideas or the bad mechanisms, because there's the particular memes and then there's the mechanisms by which memes are transmitted. But in some sense, it's like you could make the case that the most dysfunctional society would be a society full of 190 IQ people, because they all just bitch at each other and argue, and they're like, well, and they convince themselves of ideas that are the smarter you are, the easier it is to convince yourself of stupid ideas. But if you have someone who is not, does not, center their identity around their intelligence, but instead it, centers their identity around, I get up at 6 a.m., I go work for 12 hours, I go to church on Sunday, and I just do the right thing. It's like, you need people in society like that. And and you can make the case, but these people, they're susceptible to memes. They're susceptible not to logical arguments or something like that. We need the intellectual class. It's like, the hypothesis is, you actually have a pretty sophisticated ability to tell when someone is worth imitating and when they're not. Not always. That's why you have the concept of the snake oil salesman and demagogues and all of that. That mechanism can be abused. But by and large, it's sort of the idea of like, trust your gut. If you're talking to someone and you're like, there's just something about this person that like they're selling me on something, even though I can't logically necessarily describe it, you trust your gut.
It sounds too good to be true.
Yeah. And that's a real, you can make the case that instinct evolved over, many millions of years, even though it's not super logical or whatever. And I had one other piece of evidence, but go ahead.
Have you read Peter Turchin's work?
No, not familiar.
Check him out. He's awesome. Okay. But I believe it's in the book Ultra Society. Basically begins with him asking the question, how is it that we've attained these levels of cooperation among human beings outside of their kin group? Because there's a lot of animals that can cooperate within kin groups, but where there doesn't seem to be any like material advantage to cooperating with people, or no blood relation or anything like that. To the point where we can, we're existing we exist now in societies that are on a scale, and just the scale of the accomplishments that people collaborate on. Like he talks about building the International Space Station. It's a huge work of collaboration between nations, some of whom are somewhat hostile to one another. So how do human beings develop that? I don't recall if he actually uses the term memes, but what he talks about is basically like group selection mechanisms. So that there's individual selection, just natural selection. And within groups, they'll establish certain mechanisms for, how the hierarchy shakes out and all that. And those could be, the individual process of selection is still going on within the group. But the groups that are and actually the interesting argument he makes is that, Dawkins and people would, of his ilk would suggest that our desire to cooperate is like he calls it like a beautiful mistake.
Misfiring of the genes. Something like that.
And what Turchin points out is that actually whenever we see that form of cooperation, of people just helping people who happen to be their family, we call that nepotism. It's actually a very bad, it's very, very counter to the way that we cooperate in society. And his argument is that basically it's a long, very similar to what you're saying, process of selection, where the group modes of selection that produced, particularly one example would be nepotistic societies, will eventually be able to not compete against other groups.
Yes. And
that's like the level of selection that he sees. And that's how we get to this situation we're in now, where we have millions of people cooperating on things.
Yeah. This field, I'm not an expert on anything, as I'm sure people watching can tell. But this entire individual selection versus group selection, I love. It's like a civil war in evolutionary biology between the kin selectionists, the individual selectionists, and the group selectionists. It's funny, like you listen to them, they call each other names and stuff. It's a very like, which again is like, oh, it's just logic here. It's like, no, there's values underneath a lot of this. I think multi-level selection is
right, well, they're both going on at the same time.
Yes, correct. You have group selection dynamics in which you have group versus group, and there's mathematical models between like mice, whatever you call them, herds, or where it shows
colonies,
that like,
I guess.
Where there is a group, there's a group competition, individual competition, and both of those are playing out. Brett Weinstein, who is another big influence, he puts forward the idea of lineage selection, which is sort of the union between group selection and individual selection. I believe it again, for what it's worth, I believe it to be true. He had a phenomenal debate with Richard Dawkins, Brett Weinstein and Richard Dawkins, that I've watched probably 4 or 5 times in various states of with marijuana and without, to make sure I get the full thing.
Is it like the kin group selection versus?
Yeah. So
okay.
So the Richard Dawkins individual gene selection idea is genes. The only goal of a gene is to copy itself in the next generation. Mm-hmm. That's it. The group selection idea is, well, there's group dynamics too. It's not like selection is not just acting at the level of the gene. And then that's where you get Richard Dawkins saying like it's a misfiring of the genes when species, for example, like one example is in chimpanzees with menopausal females that can't reproduce anymore. They can't hunt. They really don't have much like evolutionary fitness value for the group. The individuals still kind of help them out. And Richard Dawkins would say that's a misfiring of the genes. Mm-hmm. I don't actually know specifically on that case what the group selectionist argument for why they would keep the menopausal female around, but it's the grandma hypothesis, like helping raise children and all that stuff, right? You know,
there are actually, I remember, I think it was William von Hippel is another anthropologist who talked about, he listed out all the advantages of grandmothers in a given like society or group. Yeah. And there's more than I can remember at the moment, but there were also like, they have higher rates of, this is humans, not chimps, but like higher rates of like survival in childbirth, things like that. Mm-hmm. Just from the sort of like inherited knowledge of having a grandmother around.
Like a wisdom keeper, you know?
Right.
But so the Brett Weinstein idea is that it's not the goal of the gene is not just to replicate itself in the next generation. It's to replicate itself as far into the future in as many generations down the road as possible, which is a different dynamic, and that one that does take more into account group dynamics. So for example, if a gene replicates itself in the next generation, but 100 years from now it's going to be wiped out, then that gene has failed. Evolution would have weeded that out. So evolution selects for genes and then traits that have an advantage over a long period of time, that has selection pressures being applied to it at the lineage level, not just like one generation over at the individual level. And that's how there's he speaks on it obviously much better than I do, but he kind of reconciles the group selectionist and individual selectionist debate using that model. And that would explain things like religion, like why, people who started on cathedrals in the Middle Ages that would not be finished for 200 years.
Right.
What possible individual it cost them resources and all that. But we, as the lineage, the descendants of that same lineage, are inheritors of, okay, now we have this incredible work of art. We have these incredible, you can compare them to like termite nests. There's termite nests in colonies that are like, I think 1,000 years old. It's same mound that has just been passed from one colony to another. It's like, well, when we do these kind of grand civilizational works and these, whether it's religious ideas or structures or whatever, we are the inheritors of that, and we gain an advantage for having that as like a source of unity for group cohesion and all that. Yeah. And so, I think that the lineage selection argument is powerful. And
there's, I think, a Machiavelli quote where he says, that's why you should only participate in politics if you have children, because then you're invested in the future.
That's good. Yes, that's sort of my thing about like the civil service is it's not that you want uneducated. It's not that you only want intelligent, the technocrats voting. It's the people who have stake in the game, who have responsibility, right? And so that's actually that's a better metric than intelligence, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm kind of I'm of two minds about this, because on the one hand, again, I'm always thinking about what Nietzsche would have to say, and on the one hand, the group is clearly more powerful than the individual, which is. It's interesting because people know Nietzsche as an individualist, has a lot of influence in the existential tradition, very much speaking to the person who's standing apart from the rest of society and their valuations. But he has some notes where he makes it very clear that the group is a real power, it's a real force, and it does supersede the individual in terms of just on the level of like on a factual basis. That most of the great men, as he talks about them, like Napoleon would be the example. Like, look at Napoleon, he did all these great, incredible things, but in the end, there's a quote from Napoleon where he says, "I'm just the instrument of Providence, and when she's through with me, she'll break me like a glass." And that's exactly what happens, because okay, you're posing too much of a challenge to the system we have going on here. You changed a lot of things. We'll hold on to some of that, but ultimately Nietzsche says they end up botched, badly turned out is the exact German. Someone who does not turn out well. It's almost like a health or medical term. And so that's oftentimes what happens. That the just from the angle of just what is powerful, the group certainly supersedes the power of any individual. But on the other hand, well, what's the nature of his critique then of the group? And you mentioned religion, and the person who imitates the values of those that he respects. Say, you brought up the example of a guy who just gets up, works 12 hours a day, goes to church, and there is something to the argument that there's a legitimate reason why he admires the role models that he does. But on the other hand, I mean, the nature of Nietzsche's critique of Christianity, of the Christian religion, is that it's anti-life. That you can actually have that the ultimate ideal of Christianity is like asceticism. That the saints, Jesus Christ, who doesn't marry, doesn't have children, doesn't want anything worldly. The devil offers him the whole world. He says, I don't care about that. And he is constantly talking about the kingdom of heaven is within you. The point is heaven. That's what you need to have your focus on, eternal life, not what goes on in this world, and does nothing to prevent his own death and martyrdom, right? And that sort of sets the image of what goodness is for thousands of years. And, people can debate about, the effect of Christianity on Western civilization. We can't really run a counterfactual of what it would look like if there was no Christianity. We could compare them with the pagan Greeks like Nietzsche did, but obviously that was 2,500 years ago. Very hard to say what a modern pagan society would look like now. And also we're often looking at it through the lens of Christianity that sees that as fundamentally evil. So it's very hard to have a neutral view on it.
It'd be Los Angeles. That would be a modern pagan
It would be
society.
totally pagan. It would be the Paris Olympics.
Right,
Gojira playing
yeah. Oh,
but yeah, so I guess you might create so I buy the argument that you can create a functional system through religion and these modes of mimetic transmission. But I guess Nietzsche's argument would be that might not be the best thing for mankind as a species. That referring everything back to whether or not it makes the system function, or whether it makes the group succeed and pass everything on to the next generation, certainly you wouldn't have the beautiful cathedrals if you didn't have that idea. But I think especially when people look around now, and there's this oppressive sense of malaise that everyone's sort of being turned into a cog in a machine.
Yes.
And Nietzsche would say that's directly inherited from the values of Christianity, that everyone is sort of trained to see themselves as a function. How can I be of service to other people? How can I be, even our presidents refer to themselves as a public servant in a way. And I don't know, I guess I would wonder what your reaction would be to that. That is there a downside to the group selection or the convergent mimetic evolution, as you've called it? What if it produces values that are pathological? And a final caveat, I guess I would say, is the reason why Nietzsche says this will always happen is because it's you find the lowest common denominator. So the most people, just look at the most popular music. It's not necessarily the best music, unless you're using the standard that the popular music is the best just by definition. What if the same thing is true with people's political opinions, with their religious beliefs? That basically they're going to find the form that's going to appeal to the most people is going to end up appealing to what is most average in all of them, which will be the worst aspects of them in many ways, or just the most mediocre aspects or something like that. I don't know if I'm really, I kind of
No. Yes, there's a bunch of stuff there. So the point about what if religion is, what if as a result of convergent mimetic, which convergent mimetic evolution is just the idea. In biological evolution, you can have convergent or divergent evolution. So when it comes to the biological trait of having wings, there are different species that all converged on having wings. Birds, bats, and insects did not inherit wings from one common ancestor. They all converged on it separately. Then there's divergent evolution, which is like human beings and aquatic mammals both have a similar tailbone structure because we evolved from the same ancestor. That's why aquatic mammals, their tailbone goes up and down, whereas fish goes side to side, their back fin. So the idea of convergent mimetic evolution is you have different cultures across society, separate from each other, all converging on similar religious stories. Like the monomyth is the kind of simplest example of that. So how do you have the Inuit tribe, the Sri Lankan tribe, Greece, China, they all tell similar stories about floods, or they have similar moral codes about bathing and different things that are can be hyper specific, but also in the more general sense. Of course, there's differences there as well that are relevant. But yeah, the question is, well, what if evolution selected for a set of memes that are insufficient for human
flourishing,
yeah.
Like it may be, and this, before we started recording, you asked me sort of Nietzsche's take on Darwin. This might actually speak to his fundamental difference with Darwin.
Okay.
It's Darwin's concerned about survival and Nietzsche's concerned with something more like flourishing or becoming or something like that. And I think he would say what we've converged on with all these religious systems is the ascetic ideal, is basically self-abnegation, making yourself into a function, be the family man, work, there's dignity in work, contribute to your society.
Yes.
All of these things. And his argument would be that ultimately is an impoverished form of human life.
I would say, two things. First off, I'm particularly the impoverished. We need people who go to work and keep the lights on and have family, so that we can do our podcast.
Right. But that's where, okay. If you really want to get into what Nietzsche would say about that, he would say, well, that's why parasitism is part of every social system. Is most people are going to do that, and you have. It's like the Pareto distribution. So that you're going to have a certain number of people who are way more intellectual and productive in that field. Correct. And it's actually good for the majority of the population to labor for their benefit, essentially.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I sort of have a similar idea, maybe put less cynically, in terms of every society is you can view it like a sports team where you have different players playing different positions. I know where you're going with this. So the offensive lineman is not going to run very quickly. You need some people to be very quick, but most of the team needs to be big and just be able to block, right?
Right.
And it would not make sense to say we need a team full of 400, 500 pound guys that are super strong but can't run very fast, or vice versa, right? So,
or even just the dynamic that regardless of the role, usually a team will have one or two superstars that are the really popular players.
Right. And the offensive linemen are not, you could say they live an impoverished lifestyle. They're not catching any. You know what I mean? They're not
right. They're not famous, running in the touchdown,
but they are essential to form that basis. And you could say that then team collectively succeeds as a result. And I would say, going back to the progressive versus conservative emphasis on stability versus transformation, political personality is partly genetic. It's partly wired. Evolution would have selected for that. You need people who are focused on stability, and you need people who are focused on transformation to make sure there's a balance of both. So I like the team-based analogy of different positions with different aspects. But to the point about, well, what if the memes, the software that we're running, if evolution selected for one that isn't actually equipped to deal with whatever the current threats that face the group and face human flourishing. That's possible. I mean, I live in the real world. I'm Christian adjacent. I probably believe in God. I don't know exactly if all the Protestants are
cultural Christian.
Cultural Christian adjacent. These all just terms.
Now, are you
a
cultural Protestant or cultural Catholic or cultural Orthodox?
I'm increasingly more cultural Catholic. I think the Protestants. Yeah, look, talking about the Protestant work ethic and the atomization and we're just individual cogs and all that. It's that is a That's a real problem.
And there are some people who interpret Nietzsche by saying that a lot of his problems were with specifically Lutheran Protestantism that has a lot of those elements.
Okay. Yeah. And so increasingly the idea that you need like a cohesive body of the church instead of everyone just having this own, atomized like individual relationship with God. It's like, because, and this is an area that I'm particularly interested in, which is just the current kind of theological civil wars that are going on in modern society. I talked to Presbyterian pastors who there's the whole rise of Christian nationalism, which is like, in my opinion, probably the most high potential in terms of just ascending to power mimetic faction post-Trump. The Christian, the Tucker Carlson's, Candace Owens, and then all the people who put forward the idea. This ties into what we're just talking about, whether or not the meme is sufficient.
Right. Well, because they certainly wouldn't, their values, see this, Christians get really bothered when atheists say things like this. So I'm not trying to say it as like, this proves you're wrong. But their values to me do not seem to align. Like the vibe is not apostolic Christianity of the first century. When I look at like the Christian nationalists, it's much more like masculine and like just the whole idea of nationalism.
Right. So here's the interesting thing, because this is, you could say that, or you could think about it as theological disputes within whether it's Catholicism versus Protestantism, Orthodox Church, the Christian nationalists versus the more moderate Christians, whatever. The theological disputes, it's a war, it's a battlefield, or it's a war, and there are particular battlefields, and the battlefields are usually a set of verses or a set of stories that they disagree on the interpretation of. Okay. So that's we're playing civilization, and there's one faction over here and one faction over here. The front line of the war are a particular set of verses. So the one that is again, take it for what it's worth as a non-theologian or expert on anything. The verse that you will find crop up repeatedly in a lot of theological disputes is the story of Jesus in the temple with the whip kicking out the Pharisees.
Interesting.
Where the Christian nationalists say, hey, Jesus came in with a whip and kicked them out. So let's, we need to man up here and do something similar. The moderate Christians, and I've literally been to church services where they just happen to be talking about this verse, and it's like the pastor was saying, Jesus is perfect, so he can whip people, but that doesn't mean you can. Right. But it's totally it's not like one is clearly the correct interpretation. I mean, people will say it is, but this is hermeneutics interpretation. That's why the postmodernists are correct on a lot of things. You can interpret the same verse in many different ways with many different contexts. And so one argument, at least in particular for Christianity, is that, or at least this is, I guess, how I would say it, Christianity is sufficiently broad enough in its interpretive scope that it actually is conducive to a wide range. It
can be seized on by different value systems
that might be in the benefit of the flourishing of the group at any given time.
Sure.
So in some sense, Christianity is an adaptive meme that facilitates group flourishing because, unlike the critique of, it speaks to the lowest common, the impoverished lifestyle, the average in everyone. Well, if it is the case that let's say society does look like that, it becomes decadent and people are just, atomized and falling apart and all that. Well, then what happens? The intrinsic desire to interpret the Bible more like Jesus with the whip and let's actually bring the kingdom of heaven here on earth suddenly becomes more mimetically fit. People are more receptive to that meme. And then it becomes, kind of a self-correcting mechanism. Again, this is all I'm not citing studies to put this forward, but that's sort of how I would see it.
You mentioned Yarvin earlier, and he wrote something I read a long time ago before I even knew who he was, but somebody shared this and said this is very interesting. It seems to kind of jibe with what Nietzsche's saying, where he said that modern American progressivism is what he called Ultracalvinism. And what he means by that is that it's a fundamentally it's a moral ideology that cares about what you believe first and foremost. So you probably know Tony, you spoke to Tony.
Yeah, one time. Yes.
Sort of the idea of like woke politics. He thinks it's a style of politics, not the content. Correct. It exists on the left or the right. And that it privileges an awakening of consciousness. It really matters what your consciousness is. less so than what we were talking about earlier, the realpolitik,
Yeah.
right? Those sorts of things. But I remember Yarvin's theory was essentially that, to kind of give the short version, the modern American progressive morality is like the memes of Christianity that have become so powerful they've escaped the mimetic delivery system of the aesthetics and the doctrines and superstitions
100%,
and become like just the pure morality.
Yep.
And that the most important thing is getting other people to like awaken to this pure morality. So I was thinking about that when you were talking about Christian nationalism, because it almost seems like the opposite case, at least to me. If we think that there is some sort of like, I know you can interpret it in different ways, but if we were to take, again, like there's like the red letter Christians who are like, you know, the words of Jesus are in red. So the beginning and end of what you refer everything to should be, okay, what did Jesus actually say? And what did he actually do? I think if we look at that, Christian nationalism, other than really that one passage, which by the way is, again, you could interpret it a lot of ways, but it does have that manifestation of like, you know, I don't know, the vengeful God, the Old Testament coming out, at least temporarily. But I mean, for the most part, Jesus is also saying, I don't really know how these people square. I know you can pick out that passage, but then you also have to deal with, okay, but turn the other cheek. The meek shall inherit the earth. Take no thought for the morrow, for God shall take care of all things for you. Don't worry how you'll be fed or clothed.
Yep. Store up treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy. Focus on the...
True. And so I almost wonder, it's like, are they just using just the aesthetics and the superstitions and trappings and then injecting it with a different morality?
Certainly possible, and certainly some people are. I should say, Christian nationalism, I'm sympathetic to some ideas in, depending on it depends on what you define as Christian nationalists, because they disagree. Sure. But, you know, in its most positive manifestation, I like the idea of having a common cultural grounding in a multiracial society.
Oh, I think 100%. That's the appeal. And when you say it has the most potential, that's what it is. They're trying to seize on some identity.
Yes.
Because nobody can agree on what America is.
Yes, it's the question of our time is what is an American, what is a national identity and all that. And so the Christian nationalists are putting forward something. Now, to the degree that they want to ban contraception, like condoms, or ban evolution in schools, or implement blasphemy laws, that's so, you know, nonsense that there's no scenario where I'd ever support that. But even like we brought up the meek shall inherit the earth. You know, there's a Jordan Peterson meme kind of him talking about that line in particular, where he claims it's a mistranslation, or it's not an exact translation, where meek didn't mean like meek and mild. Meek meant someone who has the capacity for mayhem but chooses to keep it contained, right? Like someone who like a master swordsman but chooses to keep his sword sheath unless, you know, absolutely necessary. So, and again, this is only from my limited conversations with Christian nationalists and actual like pastoral priests who get trained at seminary and all that stuff. But there's sort of a, just like we're talking about how there's a civil war between the group selectionists and the individual selectionists within evolutionary biology. You can think of there's a civil war within Christianity between the terms they use are heavenly minded and earthly minded.
Interesting.
So this is like a literal thing that pastors in seminary will deal with, of like, when we establish a church, how much do we want to adapt our church to like the culture of the town we're in so that it attracts people without losing our character? So if we're too heavenly minded, meaning we're just going to do what the Bible said and just follow Jesus told me to do this, I'm going to do this, and then we're fine.
Right.
Then no one's going to come to your church, and you have an obligation to go evangelize. But if you're too earthly minded, and the Protestants would be more on the earthly minded side, playing rock music and rapping in church and all that stuff, right? That might be on the earthly minded side. Then you lose the ideals which are heavenly oriented. And this is literally the terminology they use: heavenly minded versus earthly minded.
I haven't heard that distinction before. That's interesting.
Yeah, and that's of course, the answer is it's somewhere in between. You know, there's a gray area. You have to not be of the world, but you can't be like a Buddhist monk removed from it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to evangelize properly. And so, I would say the Christian nationalists lean more towards the earthly-minded crew of bringing forth the kingdom of heaven on earth. Mm-hmm. And I don't know the particular verses related to like that, you know, versus the kingdom of heaven is inside you.
Isn't that what James Lindsay would say is like communism?
Or like, kingdom of heaven on earth, utopianism?
Or like, yeah, it's like the same kind of like
James Lindsay requotes me or quotes me on Twitter multiple times. Oh yeah, calls me woke right all the time.
What?
Yeah, oh yes. Yeah. What? Yeah. The last video I did.
Centrists are woke right.
Yeah, well, I'm the woke center apparently.
Interesting. Okay.
Real quick tangent. Did you see Douglas Murray and Dave Smith have their debate on Joe Rogan?
Yeah.
Yeah, at the very end, Douglas Murray engages in what I regard as very woke tactics, accusing Dave Smith of because you mentioned someone with a Jewish last name, therefore you are inadvertently fomenting Jew hatred, right? So I clipped that 3 minutes and I tweeted it, and it kind of went viral. And James Lindsay quote tweeted it and said, "The woke right is flipping the script. Like they're going to say that Douglas Murray is the woke right." And then just a week ago when I
wasn't even really familiar with the way Lindsay was using the term until I encountered that whole thing. And to me, just from the outside in, who's not part of the right wing or the left wing, which probably change gears and kind of talk
your nascent radical center. Yeah.
I mean, I would honestly say there's only one reason that keeps me from calling myself a radical centrist, which we could talk about in a second.
Sure. Yeah.
But just from the outside in looking at it, I was like, Douglas Murray's acting exactly like a mirror of the woke left. It's just obvious to anyone who's not a partisan in this.
Yep.
If you just look at his behavior, these are all of the things that they complained about for years.
Textbook woke tactics.
So it's like, I think Lindsay seems to be using it for like the content of beliefs. Whereas to me, it makes way more sense where it's like most people are not actually talking about the content. That's why there's the endless debate about define woke and nobody can do it.
Of course.
Because ultimately it's a vibe. It's a style.
Yes.
It's a way of engagement. It's not really the content of what you're saying. Oftentimes what people have a problem with like woke leftism is just they don't like progressive politics. They just don't agree with their ends. But once they started, canceling people, shouting people down, that really bothered a lot of people and agitated them. That's the thing that actually was the like fulcrum of the whole culture war in the 2010s.
James Lindsay's I'm gonna clip this, and James Lindsay's gonna
call me woke.
Yeah, you're not the woke. You're the woke center or the woke Nietzscheans or something like that.
Sure. Yeah,
I'm sure he would.
I think most of those that milieu does not. They will still use Nietzsche because Nietzsche is probably one of the most, if not the most popular philosopher. I mean, you say Socrates or Plato, but like, one of the most. And at the same time, I can tell they don't actually like Nietzsche. They're always guarded, and they're like, look, there's a lot he said that was wrong or just abhorrent, so you shouldn't look at it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
yeah, we could go. Well, we could do a whole separate tangent on
I mean, well, I guess, to shift gears, like my main reason for not calling myself a centrist is because I don't like the direction brain politics. The conceiving of
that's
like
totally fair.
Two poles of left and right.
Yeah.
Because I don't think what left signifies and what right signifies is ever pre-established. I think it's always relative and contextual.
Yes.
And the example I use, it's such an old hat example, but it's very easy to get across. In the French Revolution, where these terms are established, pretty much any modern right-winger in the American context would be standing on the left wing as an advocate of Republican government, not for preserving a monarchy.
Correct.
I know people could argue with me about that and how there's like people who believe in unitary executive and all that. There's very few people who are actually for like hereditary monarchy. Even among the extreme right-wingers.
Yeah. They comment on my channel.
Right. Well, but in America,
there's dozens of
it's
them.
A non-starter.
Yeah.
Like it's prohibited by the Constitution. So to have titles of nobility at all. So you're cutting against the grain of like the deep vibes of American culture.
Yeah.
Again, to use that kind of language. But that example to me just shows, for all the apoplectic rage about the French Revolution that is still brought up by people like James Lindsay and those types, there are a lot of classical liberals will talk about, look, this is an example of like the chaos of progressivism. And it's like, yeah, but that what were they fighting against? They were fighting against hereditary monarchy that had become totally unresponsive to the people, totally detached. And that created the modern liberal democratic system that we all live in and are a part of. And so to me, it just seems, I think the political compass particularly has like rotted people's brains.
The 4-quadrant one?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's a libertarian framework. I mean, I've heard critiques of it as like libertarians came up with it to kind of frame politics in terms of like libertarian and authoritarian.
Right.
Which is, beneficial to kind of their worldview.
Right. They're establishing axes that would lead more people. Yeah. The goal would be, I guess, a lot of people take the test and then they say, it turns out I'm a libertarian.
Yeah. Right.
Something like that.
Well, an authoritarian obviously implies bad.
Right. Sure. But even if it was designed by a socialist or any other group, the whole notion of like, I mean, okay, who's more far right, an anarcho-capitalist or a monarchist?
Correct. Yeah.
I don't know what the answer to that is, like who's more far right, and it's not clear to me that one leads to the other.
Yes.
It seems like there's just different first principles that people can have that are different values. And it's not clear to me that they exist on this like spectrum where like, AOC is more far left than Chuck Schumer. I'm like, I think they just have two completely different worldviews. If we take them at their word of what they believe, which I don't, but but you know exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. And so like, that's kind of where I'm like allergic to calling myself a centrist, because even that implies like this directionality or of like, I'm sitting in the center, balanced between these two positions that to me, they almost fundamentally make no sense because of the vibes, because of the fact that it is a vibe, because of the fact that most people will, if they're like a voting Democrat or Republican, they have like a laundry list of issues that they then will associate with themselves that fundamentally have nothing to do with one another. If you're anti-gun Democrat or something like that, you can read Karl Marx where he says, under no pretext should we allow the workers to be disarmed. So, like the most far left person is completely against, and is that because they're just like triangulating to the center? I don't think so. I think a lot of people who are like the most far left Democrats in America will be the most anti-gun oftentimes, unless they're Marxists. Yep. So I don't know. It's not really a question.
That is the criticism of the left-right dichotomy is absolutely valid and correct. I guess while you were talking, I was thinking, I view it like the dichotomy between subjective and objective. We're talking about philosophy. Those terms in and of themselves are not like, if you only have the concept of subjective and objective, you're not going to be able to grasp like the idea of color as qualia. It's like, is it objectively true that this is blue? It's like, well, colors don't only exist in the minds of the perceiver. The qualia of blue is, to say it's an objective fact implies that it exists out independent of, a mind independent stance or whatever it is. And I've repeatedly found that, well, objective means fact, subjective means opinion. It's like, no, because your subjective sense of something is still a fact about your experience, and that sense might be detecting something that's a fact. So left and right are very blunt tools. To your point, I think there was a book recently by researchers who like noted just the cycle of which the left will be pro-tariff and then the right will be pro-tariff and then the left will be pro-tariff. And we've seen it in our,
what was the recent book, Trade Wars Are Class Wars, that came out prior to Trump's re-election. Okay. That was touted by many Democratic, influential Democrats who were like, this is an amazing book. We need to look into this.
As in like a pro-tariff argument?
Yeah. Trade wars are class wars. We need to oppose this neoliberal trading order because that exploits the third world, etc.
Yep. Or even just the degree of like skepticism of pharmaceutical companies. It's like that was all left wing. And now, then the pandemic happened and it rotated. So yes, there's still some utility to it. Again, I view it in the context of the order chaos dichotomy of go ahead.
But couldn't you say the left during the pandemic was the order side because they were saying trust the experts, trust the science?
So this is
so doesn't that kind of flips on its head?
100%. Yeah, and or like Trump is definitely not the person who is bringing order to society, right? it's first, I'm not saying this to convince you to not view it this way, because it could be the case that it's actually just better to not view it this way. The reason that I could use that conception, the very practical one, is the meme is out there. Everyone has the left-right continuum. And it's not completely
really
unreliable.
We're looking for something outside of this binary in a way, right?
Outside of the left-right binary?
Yeah, or I'm putting words in your mouth, but are you trying to like free people from being bound to?
Well, yeah, and so the center can exist at a left
Anywhere.
and right pole.
Yeah,
it can be a three-dimensional space. It can be, so in that sense, it's not suffering from just being on the left and right dichotomy. I would defend the left and right dichotomy to some degree, because it is just practically, it is partially, it's a blunt tool. It's useful. If I say I'm left wing economically, that still sort of means I'm for more redistributive policies and all that. I'm left wing on guns. Like it is kind of just a function of language. Like we could use a different word. And left and right are relative terms by definition. To your point, like what was left wing 100 years ago is now, far right, or whatever today. It comes down to, the reason I think it's valuable is because of the stability versus transformation dichotomy. People are wired, at least along one dimension. There's many different dimensions of personality. You could be extroverted, high positive emotion or low positive emotion. Conscientiousness doesn't have any necessarily direct correlation, although there's a correlation between conscientiousness and political orientation, as well as openness to experience. But on the dimension of leaning towards stability and leaning towards transformation and novelty, that is a consistent, real, cross-cultural phenomenon.
Sure. Okay.
And that's what I think of when I think of left and right.
Like we have to deal with that reality, like however vulgar or blunt it is.
Yeah. And so, like, for example, Trump, people say, well, Trump is the chaos candidate, obviously. So how does that fit onto the left-right like stability? In some sense, you can look at it from the mimetic perspective. What's the narrative? What's the meme of Trump? Or what is the meme that Trump wrote on? Make America great again. We used to have something great. We used to have a once great society with stability and order and all that, but the radical left has come and ruined it. And so now we need a person to go in, shake things up to bring us back to order. Because in the more fundamental questions, well, the radical left, they don't believe in a man or a woman. They don't believe in, whatever, religion, all of the things that give us order and stability. The left, this is the narrative, the left challenge. There's truth to that, obviously, some degree. So that narrative is a right-wing narrative, right? The point about like the pandemic with the lockdowns was the left more in favor of order or whatnot. That's probably the best. That's a great example of how it defies the spectrum. I believe conservative temperaments are actually more sensitive to disease in terms of conservatives have higher disgust sensitivity. Yeah. Which includes like infectious disease. That's why conservatives are much more like, don't do any, just missionary sex, none of that other, weird shit or whatever. Not that that's all conservatives, but that's the meme. And it's like, there's a famous study that shows that a very strong correlation between the prevalence of infectious disease and like authoritarian attitudes, like politically. Yeah. So it's like, hey, if everything's disease, we're going to have strict sexual taboos. That's right wing. If everything's disease, we're going to be, staying inside. And so that was the exact opposite for COVID. Now, my hypothesis for why that would be, actually, I was thinking about this on the way here. Early on, actually, conservatives were not necessarily against the lockdowns. We didn't know how bad the disease, if the disease was like, if it did kill 1 in 10 people, I'm sure the conservatives would have been just as get inside, you're not smoking weed at the skate park or whatever. You could very easily see a conservative narrative. Once I think people perceive bad ideas as diseases. We know for a fact that moral judgments are processed in the same part of the brain as literal disgust in terms of like rotting meat. Yeah. That's why all of our things are, I wash my hands of this, I need to shower, I feel gross after doing something immoral or whatnot. It's literally the same part of the brain. And so from a conservative, which virus is worse? You know, COVID or the woke mind virus, right?
Sure.
And the woke mind virus is the one enforcing the lockdowns. Again, that's how I would...
Yeah.
That's how I would view that. But to your point, it's like, okay, well, if we have to do all these gymnastics to keep the left and right dichotomy, what's the point? And it really is a practical matter of left and right are sort of so embedded in how the average person conceptualizes politics that if I'm going to lead, you know, if I'm going to say I'm a radical centrist, it at least creates some grounding for someone to go, okay, he's not far right, he's not far left. You know, what can we hear from there? And really, at that point, then maybe we should, you know, the first thing I should say is I'm a radical centrist, mainly because I think the whole political dichotomy is screwed, you know, and, or whatever, and that it's a performative contradiction. But you raise a very valid point for sure.
Interesting. Yeah, it's almost like what we call left and right. Maybe even the order chaos dichotomy you bring up might be even more fundamental, and it might even be the case that occasionally the left will seize on the order side and the right will seize on the chaos side. That could even be possible too.
Yeah.
That if we're really fundamentally just talking about two different temperaments that seem to be broadly represented across like two halves of society,
they can flip-flop in terms of positions.
Yeah,
and
possibly.
A great example of this is environmentalism. So conservative temperaments are more disgust sensitive, but being environmentalist, that's a left-wing thing. But within left-wing people, what are they disgusted by? Like sludge and the toxic sludge and whatnot.
Yeah.
So you could get someone who is conservatively temperamentally, or from a personality perspective, with high disgust sensitivity, but their disgust sensitivity is oriented towards like the pollution of our environment. And so they're taking on left-wing environmental beliefs, but the narrative they're being told is one that activates their disgust sensitivity, which you could put by definition is more a conservative belief, but I guess you could switch those two. You know, it's not like fundamental. It's like yin and yang could just be switched.
It's really,
but it still refers to different things.
Yin and yang, yeah, which each contains a seed of the other, don't they?
And that is why the symbol of my channel is yin yang with some sun beams around it.
Yeah. Well, Paul, it's been a great conversation. Do you have anything coming up you want to talk about or shout out before we...
Do I have anything coming up?
Or any projects you're working on? Or
I do have some... I think I might... Are you familiar with JREG by any chance, the political satirist?
I see JREG around a lot. I think that's kind of like I'm not the target audience for that.
That makes sense, yeah. He's much more on the meme side of things. I think I might do a collaboration with JREG here on something, but
okay.
But we shall see.
Yeah. Well, you have a very productive channel, which I admire very much. Everyone should check out PF Jung. And thanks again, man.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Appreciate it.